To history books, the Cuban Missile Crisis is often described as a high-stakes game of brinkmanship between the Kremlin and the White House. But to me, a 19-year-old secretary living in a bedsit in West Hampstead in London and working at the Law Society in Chancery Lane, it was something very different. It was a period of quiet, cold terror. Even now, more than 60 years later, talking about those days still makes me emotional. We lived with this constant heavy awareness that the end of the world might not be far away. Not in an explosive, dramatic way, but in a slow, suffocating one. The crisis truly broke for us on the 22nd of October. Like millions of others, I listened to US President John F. Kennedy's televised address. His voice was grave as he spoke about what he called unmistakable evidence of Soviet nuclear sites in Cuba. He announced a naval quarantine and warned that any launch would be met with full retaliation. At that moment, the danger stopped being theoretical. It felt terminal. In London, the atmosphere was melancholy. There was a kind of keep calm and carry on response from the government, but it came with an almost deafening silence. There was very little clear guidance. We didn't know then that the Prime Minister, Harold Macmillan, was privately terrified that London, the city I worked in and lived in, was a primary target. While priceless artworks were quietly being moved from the National Gallery to secret locations in Wales, ordinary people like me were largely left to cope on our own. What I didn't know, and what none of us knew, was just how close the end had come. While we were taping up toilet handles and listening to that transistor radio, events were unfolding in secret that could have changed everything. Days after Kennedy's speech, deep in the Atlantic, a Soviet submarine carrying nuclear torpedoes was depth-charged by American ships. Its crew, exhausted, panicking, and cut off from Moscow, believed war might have already begun. To launch their weapons, they needed the agreement of 3 senior officers. 2 voted to launch. One man, Vasily Arkhipov, refused. He said no, and because he said no, the world didn't end. The official advice we were given now seems almost absurd, even comical considering what we were facing. We were told not to evacuate because apparently no place in Britain was safer than any other. We were advised to choose a so-called fallout room, ideally in the centre of the house with few windows, or a cellar if you had one. We were told to pile up heavy furniture, books, even bags of earth against the walls to protect ourselves from radiation. We were advised to fill the bath and every spare container with water, and bizarrely, to tape up the toilet handle or remove the chain altogether. In those days, you had to flush a toilet by pulling down on a chain attached to an overhead cistern, so the clean water in the cistern wouldn't be accidentally flushed away. If you were caught outside when the warning sounded, the advice was simply to lie flat in a ditch or against a wall and cover your skin. Painfully inadequate, don't you think? Looking back, that's how you managed existential terror for the public back then, with pamphlets about ditches and toilet cisterns. The government prepared for continuity, saving art, saving state, but for people, the plan was essentially a quiet form of resignation. Today, management is different. It's constant. We live with a curated barrage of information and instruction, amber alerts on phones, emergency broadcast tests, real-time racking of conflicts on social media. We're given the illusion of control through awareness. We're told to have go bags and emergency plans, not just to lie in a ditch. But I wonder, does knowing more in real time make us feel more secure? Or does it just feed a different kind of anxiety, one that's less about silent dread and more about relentless scrolling panic? The fear amongst the public was palpable. At the Law Society we carried on with our work, but it felt surreal against a backdrop of imminent destruction. During lunch breaks, a group of us would gather round a tiny transistor radio, listening, hoping to hear that the Russian ships carrying missiles heading for Cuba had turned back. The broadcasts preparing the nation for a possible attack were chilling. At one point, in sheer desperation, someone suggested we pray for peace. And so we did, quietly together. And then came the moment none of us will ever forget. The announcement that the Soviet Premier, Nikita Khrushchev, had backed down and ordered his ships to turn back at the very last moment. The whole country erupted in relief. In my office, we laughed, we cried, and people hugged one another without any self-consciousness at all. Colleagues who normally kept a careful professional distance were suddenly clinging to each other in tears. The memory of that relief has never left me. It's not an understatement to say the world had come terrifyingly close to nuclear war. And for the first time in nearly 2 weeks, we knew there would be a tomorrow. The relief was a physical, collective explosion. Today, crises don't seem to end with that kind of clear, shared release. They simmer and evolve and are replaced by the next alarm. The fear I felt in 1962 was acute, total, and then, thankfully, it was over. The fear we manage now feels chronic. History books explain what happened then and now. But this is how one of those moments felt, and perhaps the nature of that feeling itself has changed. We traded fallout pamphlets for fear feeds, but at its core, that knot in the stomach of a 19-year-old in London, or of a person today staring at a troubling headline, and that feeling is ancient. It's knowing danger is nearer, and longing above all for a safe tomorrow. Thank you for listening.